League Baseball will not schedule any more promotion of Roger Waters. Major League Baseball has banned advertising by Roger Waters promoting his tours, Roger Waters being a former member of the group Pink Floyd. And the story goes on, the leadership of the Jewish advocacy organization B'nai B'rith International, B'nai B'rith was created by the Rothschilds, by the way, sent a letter to Baseball Commissioner Rob Manfred last month, criticizing the sport's involvement in ticket sales for Waters' This Is Not a Drill tour. And Major League Baseball was among the organizations sponsoring ticket pre-sales. And B'nai B'rith President Charles O. Kaufman and the chief executive called Waters an avowed anti-Semite whose views on Jews and Israel far exceed the boundaries of civil discourse. But of course, all you've got to do is criticize Israel and its policies towards the Palestinians, and you immediately, according to these characters, exceed the boundaries of civil discourse. And one of the things that they've done is to expand the definition of anti-Semitism so they can encompass and censor more and more people. So a simple and accurate definition of anti-Semitism, even taking into account that anti-Semitism does not mean anti-Jewish. They just tell us it does. Anti-Semitism is a term for a group of languages in the Middle East, which is overwhelmingly Arabic in nature. Anyway, a simple and accurate definition would be discrimination against Jewish people for being Jewish. It's like the definition of any so-called discrimination or racism. It's discrimination against people because of the nature of who they are and cannot change. But that does not preclude criticism and exposure of Israel, and particularly the Sabbatean Frankist cult that controls Israel and hides behind the Jewish community of Israel. And so they had to expand it, because where they're going now, which is complete censorship of everything, required an expansion of that definition. And so now the definition of anti-Semitism has been expanded to the point where it includes criticism of Israel, sits back, can't believe it, takes a deep breath, might swoon any second. And of course, what happened during the run-up of years to the last general election in Britain is that the Labour Party was targeted by the, in effect, Sabbatean Frankist cult through its various agencies as being anti-Semitic. And the leader, Jeremy Corbyn, who's got a backbone of jelly, by the way, just bowed down to it. And something else that needs to be emphasized as confirmation that it's nothing to do with protecting Jewish people from discrimination, and that is the fact that if you are Jewish and you criticize Israel, you get even more abuse and targeting than if you're not. And this has led to the bizarre and extraordinary sight of Jewish people being expelled from the Labour Party for being anti-Semitic. I would say you couldn't make it up, but you don't have to, because it's the land of lunacy now. So here we have Roger Waters, who is a critic of Israel's treatment of the Palestinians, which, what word can I describe or use to describe the treatment of Palestinians? Let's try horrific for starters. So he's a critic of the horrific treatment of Palestinians by the hierarchy that runs Israel and its military, and of course Mossad. You can't talk about Israel in any way, shape or form without Mossad. And so he has to be shut up, and he has to be deplatformed. And so the power of the self-styled representatives of 0.2% of the world population can stop advertisements for his tours being promoted by Major League Baseball. And that's just one example of a vast, vast web, which I expose in detail. Breathtaking it is, across the world, particularly the Western world, of ultra-Zionist hate groups, because that's what they are, because what they do is seek to demonize their targets and get people to hate them. They're hate groups, ironically claiming to be anti-hate. I feel sorry for them because they're full of hate. Anti-hate is not love, by the way. Anti-hate is another form of hate. If you see how it plays out and you see the hate on people's faces who are claiming to be anti-hate, they are vicious, vicious, cold, calculated organizations. Some at the core, or at the core they'll know, but many of the expressions of this hate network seeking to silence free speech of other people will have no idea that they're actually playing out the agenda of a Sabbatean Frankist cult that hates Jewish people. So another story, again, we are seriously into you can't make it up territory, involves a journalist, an alternative journalist called Abby Martin. She used to be a presenter on the Russian station RT. And this is the headline: journalist Abby Martin sues state of Georgia, wait for this, over law requiring pledge of allegiance to Israel. This is America. The Jewish population in total of America is around 2%. The vast majority of Jewish people in the world are in America and Israel. Overwhelming number. And yet, a journalist has to pledge allegiance to Israel for the right to speak at a university. And as I've exposed in the trigger, these pledges of allegiance to Israel, before anyone can actually speak, are increasing all across America. And you know, what this Sabbatean Frankist cult does is it expands its censorship by encompassing more and more things that are considered anti-Semitic, even into large amounts of territory where the word Jewish or Zionism or Israel is not even mentioned. And one way they do this is through something they call a trope. It's an anti-Semitic trope. And this is now encompassing criticising bankers. Oh, you mean Jewish bankers? The New York hierarchy. Oh, you mean the Jewish New York hierarchy? And so on. And so you don't even have to mention Israel or Jewish or Zionism to be an anti-Semite these days, because you have to keep expanding the definition if you want to keep expanding the reasons to silence and censor. And you know the irony in all this? By imposing this outrageous, inhuman, anti-freedom censorship, they are confirming the very claims they're trying to silence, which is that the representatives of 0.2% of the global population have a power and influence way, way, way beyond their number, and therefore a legitimate question to anyone who wants to even consider themselves a journalist or someone in control of their own mind would absolutely insist on asking, why is that the case? I was banned from speaking in Australia by one guy running a man and a dog ultra-Zionist organization and two ludicrous ultra-Zionist candidates for election to government, plus an article and a campaign in the ultra-Zionist newspapers of Rupert Murdoch. I've not even yet passed the fingers of one hand that tiny group was responsible for a ludicrous, again spineless, immigration minister called Coleman from banning me from Australia a matter of 4 hours before my flight left, having been given permission to speak in Australia many, many months before. And in his, quote, judgment, i.e. the judgment of the ultra-Zionist handful, could not point, indeed accepted, that in the 10 previous visits to Australia, there had never been a problem with my talks, and never had I said anything that in any way contravened the law. But we're banning you anyway. Why? Because he's doing what he's told. So here we have this situation, and it's all based on this BDS campaign, this campaign to boycott Israel until it starts treating the Palestinians with respect and justice. It's nothing more than another version of the boycotting of South Africa when it was controlled by a white minority government that eventually led to the overthrow of white minority rule and was replaced by black minority rule through the ANC, the African National Congress, that is just a black version of the white minority rule before. One party state replaced, or one race state control was replaced by a one party state, the African National Congress. But that's another thing. And by the way, no one worked more closely and supportively with the white minority government of South Africa than the government of Israel. So here we have a peaceful, non-violent attempt to pressure Israel into treating the Palestinians with respect. But instead, the people that support it are demonized. And they're demonized because, of course, they want to shut it down. So the reason that Roger Waters is said by the ultra-Zionist hate groups to be worthy of censorship is that he supports BDS, and the same with Abby Martin. So here's the story. After refusing to sign a pledge of allegiance to the State of Israel, the state of Georgia shut down a screening of journalist and filmmaker Abby Martin's new feature-length documentary, Gaza Rights for Freedom, at Georgia Southern University. Now she is suing the state, claiming the decision is a violation of the First Amendment, which it blatantly bloody is. Along with the Council on American Islamic Relations and the Partnership for Civil Justice Fund, today she filed a federal free speech lawsuit against the university system of Georgia. And I would intervene here because I'm not coming from any political direction. I don't support any political party. I think they're all appalling, all part of the same system in the end. And I don't support any religion, and I don't target any religion in particular. I think all religions are the greatest form of mind control ever invented. But I will take the Council on American Islamic Relations, and indeed the Islamic world in totality, more seriously when it talks about free speech, if vast elements of the Islamic world didn't also suppress free speech. Free speech is freedom to speak, freedom to have a different opinion. It's not the freedom to be killed or to be destroyed by having a different opinion to a religion's opinion. That is also tyranny. And what you see when you look at the censorship of free speech by the ultra-Zionist Sabbatean Frankist cult in all its forms, and the censorship of free speech by Islamic extremists, ironically, you are looking at the same state of mind, manifesting under a different name. Martin was dismayed by the university's decision, understandably. The censorship of my talk, based on forced compliance to anti-BDS laws in Georgia, is one level of a nationwide campaign, she said, to protect Israel from grassroots pressure. We must stand firmly opposed to these efforts and not cower in fear to these blatant violations of free speech. Hallelujah to that. 28 states have already mandated loyalty pledges to Israel as a means to outlaw dissent. But in December, President Trump passed, who's owned by the Sabbatean Frankist cult, as I mentioned, President Trump passed legislation effectively criminalizing the boycott, divestments and sanctions BDS movement that aims to put pressure on the Jewish state through economic action along the lines of the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa. The law mandates that any public institution would be subject to losing all funding if the government deems that they are not doing enough to stamp out anti-Semitism, which it explicitly states includes any criticism of the Israeli government. In December, Mint Press reported that the British government under Boris Johnson is planning to introduce similar legislation. 0.2% of the global population, and the people I'm talking about are a fraction of the 0.2%. They have that power, and it is being made illegal to point out that they have that power. This is the tyranny whose name must not be spoken. That'll be the bloody day.